Good evening and welcome to the City of Pasco Council's special meeting and regular workshop. The council thanks you for being a part of our city government. At special meetings, the council takes formal action on specific items, and during the workshops, only discusses issues with no formal actions taken. The agenda packets are available on the City of Pasco's website at www.pasco-wa.gov/agenda. Please note that the city council meetings continue to be held remotely and may be accessed through GoToWebinar. This meeting is being also televised live on Pasco TV, channel 191, on Spectrum Cable in Pasco and Richland, and also streamed on the city's Facebook page, website, and YouTube channel. This and previous council meeting videos is available on the city's website. Through proclamation number 20-28, Governor Inslee extended a directive making temporary changes to the Open Public Meetings Act. These virtual meetings will continue until the OPMA restrictions are lifted. And lastly, the public may submit their comments and/or questions for items not on the agenda by contacting the city manager or city clerk or using the feedback form on the city's website. And once again, I just want to remind everyone about our masks and our social distancing. And just want to be consistent with sharing with everybody that it's not over. We still have to maintain our guard on making sure we stay in this path of increasing or reducing our positive case counts and trying to eliminate this virus that has us in this pickle that we're in, and hoping that this pandemic can be over sooner than later. So thank you very much. We in this room, we maintain very much more than social distance requirements, and have the sanitizing gel and sanitize the area here before we start our meetings. And we would encourage everyone to do the same and take precautions wherever they may be. So thank you for that. With housekeeping issues out of the way, can we have a roll call, please?
Council members Alvarado.
Present.
Maloney.
Present.
Milne.
Present.
Roach.
Present.
Serrano.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you hear me? I don't have any sound. I can't hear anything.
I am both present and can hear Mayor Pro Tem Barajas.
All I see is lips.
Can you hear me, Mayor Pro Tem Barajas? So her sound is now. Did you already call on her?
I did not.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Mayor Pro Tem Barajas, you know she's here.
Well, we know she's here.
Yeah.
We know she's here. So we're just having some technical difficulties.
And then Mayor Martinez.
Present.
Great.
So everyone's present.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Maybe Ms. Barajas and John Funfar could take care of some technical issues while we rise.
Okay.
And can you hear us now? Can you hear us now?
I can hear you all.
All right, thank you. If you would all rise for the flag salute, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for that. And again, we're in a special meeting tonight, and we'll go to the next on the agenda is ordinances and resolutions not relating to hearings. We have the interlocal agreement with Benton Franklin Health District COVID-19 testing. And I believe, do you want to start, or Chief Gear?
If I could start,
Okay.
the chief did share with me a few numbers. He's going to walk us through the specific agreements. Council, I appreciate the flexibility you gave staff last week. We were able to get the site up and operational on Thursday. And since that time, we've had almost 500 people tested. So I think 80 the first day, close to 90 the second day, 100 on Sunday, and 188 folks were able to get through there and get tested today. Mayor shared with me earlier that he was tested with a favorable result on with about a day and a half turnaround. So pretty excited to have that operating. Again, I want to recognize the chief for his leadership in this, and council for their providing the flexibility, and also the city attorney's office. Put the city attorney and the attorney for Benton Franklin Health through some paces to get these agreements put into order and get them in a form that protected both the city and the health district and clarified our relationship. So with that, Chief, I'm going to turn it over to you to discuss the item A and B.
Well, the item A is the agreement with Health District. Benton Franklin Health District has received funds from the state health department to do COVID testing locally, but they just did not feel they had the capacity to take that on along with all their current responsibilities. We talked about it for a few weeks and finally they came to us and asked if Pasco Fire could help organize that and put it together. We did. We reached out to a company called Columbia Safety, which we'll talk about in a second here with the PSA to help us out with that. But primarily, the first agreement is the agreement with the health department to reimburse the city 100% for our expenditures in the operations of the testing site. So without any questions on the first agreement, I guess, from council.
Any questions from the council? I know that last week, one of the questions or concern was to ensure that the health district already had the funds so that we wouldn't, we as a city and taking the role, responsibility role would not be left without being funded for this, and that's not the case, correct, Fire Chief?
Yes, the health district has CARES funding from the state to do testing.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the council?
This is Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Mr. Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief Gear, I definitely had brought up a number of questions I had about liability and procurements and such. I think this spells it out very well of exactly who has what, and clearly the liability is very limited. There's some broad protections, it sounds like, in place. Not to mention the fact that it looks like the health district will actually be purchasing the equipment and such, which is, I guess, where I could see the most potential confusion. I have seen most potential confusion in government reimbursements in the past, so it all looks great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I just like to comment. This is Councilmember Alvarado.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to attend the, I guess, inauguration of this on behalf of Mayor and Council, and just do want to commend Chief and all the different folks who put this together in such a short time. And so I appreciate seeing that before us tonight. That, I mean, these things don't just happen, and so I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarado. I would like to also piggyback on that. And again, thank you, Mr. Alvarado, for attending the press conference for the beginning of setting up this test site. I couldn't make it, so Mr. Alvarado sat in for me, and appreciate that very much. I want to thank Chief Gear and the staff that you brought in. From my understanding, it's mostly retired firefighters that come in and help you with this, Chief Gear. But also, I went in on Friday to get tested myself. I wanted to make sure that I was okay so that I could take care and ensure that I wasn't being harmful for my elderly parents. So I went in, got tested. I would tell you that the staff is amazing. They were courteous. They were helpful. They did it efficiently. There was 3 lines. There was only one line was available when I was there. And I got to tell you, everybody was dressed in civilian clothes. To me, it was just wonderful to go in, get out, get it tested, and then most of all to have favorable negative test results. So, Chief Gear, thank you once again. It was a collaboration between the city and the health district and many others involved, and it is quite the site. And it's just wonderful to see good things happen. And this is going to be a benefit to the city for the near future. So thank you very much. Any other comments from the council before we entertain a motion? If not, Mayor Pro Tem?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. I move to adopt resolution number 3993, approving the interlocal agreement with Benton Franklin Health District for the COVID-19 testing site.
Thank you. There's been a motion to approve and adopt resolution number 3993. Is there a second?
I'll second that. This is Councilmember Roach.
Councilwoman Roach with a second. Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. It passes unanimously. Okay, and the next item B is a resolution with professional services agreement with Columbia Safety LLC for the COVID-19 testing site. Mr. Gear, Chief Gear, do you want to elaborate?
Yes, Mayor. Actually, when health came to us and asked if fire would do it, similar to what was going on the west side, I just didn't think we had the capacity to put 20 extra people at that site every day, and kind of actually had an aha moment while I was trying to figure out how to get this done. And thought, there's a company in town that does a lot of first aid training for private industry, and also does a lot of EMT training for young kids that are coming up that need their EMT prior to getting hired at the fire department. So, and I knew a guy that worked there because he's on my incident management team, my fire team. Got a hold of him, and he said, "Yeah, we've got people that are looking for work that are underemployed." So that's when it kind of really came together. Here's a source of EMTs that need the work. We can provide the management, the oversight, but we can't provide the 15 to 20 staff people every day dependably to keep this site up and running. So we formed a partnership with Columbia Safety, and they are essentially a subcontractor to the city who's the contractor to the health department to provide this site. It's a little bit convoluted, but that's kind of how we had to roll with this to make it happen. And it's working out really well. And as the mayor alluded to, those are the people that are doing the actual testing, the registration technicians and the EMTs. We're providing some retirees there that are managing finance, logistics, planning, operations, and essentially a site commander or incident commander through the use of retired people. So it was kind of, people keep saying Pasco Fire. It isn't really just Pasco Fire. We pulled a whole bunch of different stuff together to make this work. And this PSA you're considering now, this professional services agreement, is for Columbia Safety to pay their employees that are working at the site. So with that, any questions?
Well, again, thank you for that clarification, Chief Gear. Appreciate it. And yes, all those people were professional and just great to work with as I went through there. So any other questions or comments from the council? If not, Mayor Pro Tem, would you like to entertain the motion?
Absolutely, Mayor. I move to adopt resolution number 3994, approving the professional services agreement with Columbia Safety LLC for the COVID-19 testing site.
There's been a motion. Do I hear a second?
It's Councilmember Maloney. I'll second that.
Okay, seconded by Mr. Maloney. So this motion is to adopt resolution 3994. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Passes unanimously. All right, well, thank you for that. This is, go to the next section, and it's the end of our special meeting. So I will adjourn the special meeting, and then we can all go to the regular meeting, the regular workshop meeting. So I will now call the regular workshop meeting to order. We have already did our housekeeping and the Pledge of Allegiance and the roll call. So next, we will go right into item number 4, verbal reports from council members. Does anybody have any reports, anything they'd like to share with the council, with the city today? If not, then we'll
I'll
move.
go real quick.
Mr. Serrano, go ahead.
So thank you. Today I attended the Hanford Area Economic Fund Investment Committee Group, HAFIC, where we discussed, we lend out money that comes from waste fees collected at Hanford to assist in promoting new businesses or existing businesses. The fund itself is stable. Nonetheless, the folks that we've loaned money to in the private sector, at least, are struggling to repay. So that fund is probably going to have kind of a belt cinching effort to a degree. So I say that because for anyone interested in looking to that as a funding source, the money's still there, but it's not going to be maybe as, I don't want to say easily, but maybe less readily given, just given the fact that almost all of our private portfolio is struggling to pay. Fortunately, we do have a balance of public portfolio. I know the city and the port and a couple of other local jurisdictions have some funds out. So that's where we are. We're trying to be good stewards of the money that comes in from those waste fees, and we'll keep on rolling. Thank you.
Thank you,
This
Mr.
is
Schwarber.
Councilmember Roach, and just reporting back that I attended the Community Actions Connections meeting virtually last Thursday, as well as Visit Tri-Cities on Wednesday morning, and that we should have a council presentation from Michael Novakovich, I believe, in October, and I'm not sure which public workshop date that's scheduled for, but it's one of them.
Thank you, Councilwoman Roach. I will report that, again, just continue to attend elected leaders' meetings and with the health district to continue talks on how we can move forward with our businesses opening up and moving into potential phase 2. As everybody well knows by now, they're opened up to agritourism. We have Middleton's Harvest Fest that's going on. That was the big deal for many people in the Tri-Cities. Anyway, and also continuing to talk about how we can move forward and continue to get our economy going again. Also attended some meetings with some potential elected officials to discuss where we are as Pasco and as a city and where we're trying to go, and some of the things that would be helpful for us in the future. Anybody else would like to comment? If not, then we're right on for items for discussion. We have 5A, ordinance, a code amendment waterfront development district. And Mr. White, do you want to take the lead on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And very briefly, Senior Planner Jacob Gonzalez will be introducing this topic. He's been working directly with the port and with at least 2 of the port's consultants to steer this through the Planning Commission and bring it before council. So with that, Jacob, would you like to take it from here?
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Mayor and members of council. The proposed waterfront development district represents an exciting opportunity for our community. The creation of the new zoning district, which is led by the Port of Pasco, will implement a long process that dates back to the 2010 Boat Basin and Marine Terminal Plan, and also the 2016 Somos Pasco, the Regional Economic Strategic Vision. The zoning district is created for Osprey Point and includes approximately 52 acres along the Columbia River, bordered by Ainsworth Avenue. Although the current site is zoned and classed for industrial use, the comprehensive plan update has reclassified the area for mixed residential and commercial uses. The preliminary concept for residential and commercial uses was also captured throughout the ongoing urban growth area expansion effort and the subsequent plans for sewer and transportation, those ongoing plans by the city. The waterfront development district does have some departures from our existing code and development standards, specifically on parking, density, and height. However, we believe the code as proposed by the Port of Pasco offers a significant opportunity to provide residents of Pasco and our region with a unique experience that provides additional access to the waterfront. The item was discussed by the Pasco Planning Commission over several meetings and public hearings and received a unanimous recommendation of approval at the June 18th meeting. With that, I'd like to introduce Nicole Stickney from AHBO, who has been working on behalf of the Port to create the proposal, and Randy Hayden, the Executive Director for the Port of Pasco, to share with you some more information about the proposal.
Thank you very much, Jacob. And thank you, Council, for hearing our presentation tonight. Glad to join you virtually and present on this topic. We can go to the next slide. I just wanted to give you some of the high points about what we're proposing here for this zoning district. As was mentioned, this will be a new chapter in Pasco zoning code, and this will implement a new or a land use designation that will be assigned down at Osprey Point once your comprehensive plan process is completed. At least that's what we anticipate to occur. And so this will implement that that choice to have a mixed use development down in that area. So we're moving away from just strictly industrial to a mixture of uses for that waterfront site. And I would emphasize again that there are important similarities, but also some dissimilarities with existing zoning districts in terms of your development standards and uses. And that was done on purpose. We wanted to create something kind of unique down there. And in order to do that, we need to have some unique parameters available. And so we've looked carefully at what the market would need down there in terms of market demand and economic opportunities out there, and looked at how also it would be ideal to formulate a unique sense of community and a really vibrant, active place down at Osprey Point. So those have all been taken into account. Next slide. This was a priority that was voiced in the Somos Pasco project. Some of the key things that were voiced in terms of that project was that down at the Pasco's waterfront, they wanted to see a mixed use opportunity down there. So a mixture of residential options as well as commercial development, and some kind of unique opportunities down there. If you've read through the code, you've seen that we're talking about things like artisan manufacturing and some other different uses that will bring things into the mix and really create some vibrancy and some cool activity down in that area. We're also looking at open space and public access and what the riverfront needs as well. I also want to emphasize that we've looked closely at the city's existing shoreline management program, the SMP, and we've made sure that the development that will be introduced will be looking at those regulations as well. And so we wrote the code to be consistent with that. The next slide. So just to be a little specific here, although this ordinance, once you pass it, won't assign the zoning per se, what we're asking for is that that zoning that will be created will eventually be assigned to 3 parcels down at Osprey Point that is owned by the Port of Pasco. And that's just south of Ainsworth Avenue. Hopefully you're familiar with that specific spot that we're looking at, just right there on the Columbia River. And next slide. So just to talk a little bit more about this mixed use proposal, one reason why the port wants to pursue it is because it will support job growth. And of course, part of their mission is economic development and providing more opportunities for businesses in that area. Also, we believe makes sense for the location because we do want to create a vibrant waterfront destination. And if you want to have people down there and you want to have activities, you want to have that mixture that mixed use provides with residents and a balance of commercial activities as well. We are excited that this will provide opportunities for different housing types. So there's going to be an array of different options down there and a potential for some different housing than we've seen traditionally in the Tri-Cities area. Also, we acknowledge that industrial development has been changing a bit, and so the port is looking at their portfolio on the whole of where they have industrial lands, and it just seems that this unique site down on the waterfront with all of its assets and the natural beauty down there, it seems like it might be more advantageous community-wide and for the port in their mission to provide this for mixed-use designation rather than strictly industrial development. And finally, an objective here is to foster a compatible mix of those different uses, light industrial, some recreational uses, and that commercial and residential that I've been speaking about. Next slide. So I just wanted to just kind of sum it up here by giving you some big ideas. The vision for the area is something that's very walkable and active. We want to have a lot of recreational uses down in that site. We want some higher density than we're used to seeing in Pasco and certainly in the Tri-Cities in general. There's going to be a very keen focus on quality design, and so that's going to be part of what the port will accomplish when they're looking at different development agreements and maybe conditioning the site further if they want to. They can set forth some CC&Rs, things like that for them on the private side. Again, in terms of zoning, though, we want different uses to transition across the sites. We're looking at a mixture of how people are going to work within the space and interact within the space. We, again, are promoting a mix of housing options. One thing I didn't speak yet to was private roads. Private roads are part of this, and that is one of the departures that you'll find from other portions of Pasco's Title 25 different zoning districts. But what we want to do with those private roads is have an opportunity to engage the public and have different opportunities out there, like close down a street and have a street party. We want to have those types of a street dance. We want to have those types of opportunities down there. So really events is the focus on that. And then finally, as I mentioned, we're going to integrate some public and private uses, and we're looking at parking issues. We want to avoid an oversupply. So there's certainly things and certain objectives that the port has really focused in on, and that has all come to consideration when we've put this proposed code language together. And with that, I'll turn it over to Randy from the Port of Pasco to speak a little bit more on the last slide.
Thank you, Nicole. And if we could go ahead and go to the next slide. And it's good to see you all, council. Thanks for the chance to be here today. So I just have one slide to present. Can you hear me okay? Thumbs up?
Yes.
Thumbs down? Okay, thanks.
Yes, we got it.
And this is the only slide I wanted to present today. We are working with a master developer on the property. We currently have a letter of interest with JMS Homes. So we're working through an overall site plan and other pieces that would go with it. But just to put some meat to what the code would bring to this property, I just wanted to go over this a little bit with you. So as Nicole said, there is a range of housing options here. So you see in the blue area up in the northwest corner, that is not zero lot line, but very close lot line townhouses. And then down along the water, you have some condos. And then the purple kind of in the center section of 3 buildings are also residential units. But very important for the mixed use concept, all of those buildings on the ground floor have commercial. So that's retail, could be some professional space, restaurants. And I'm going to use exciting a lot because this is a very exciting development. And this property in particular with its waterfront location, it really cries out for something special here. So if we were to put together a development that just had some housing and people got to live down there, we would not be meeting our objective. This really is to be a destination to attract people to come and enjoy a very vibrant waterfront activity. So we've also got on the right-hand side there an amphitheater with an indoor entertainment venue as well. And then we've got a public market. That kind of angled building is about a 60,000 square foot public market that we've been talking about for many years in the Tri-Cities. And then there is also room for a hotel there. So we're really working to maximize the waterfront, make this a place that people will want to come and enjoy. You can live there, but we hope that's not all the people that are there. We want people from the Tri-Cities, the region, to think, hey, let's go to the Tri-Cities and go down to Osprey Point, because we just don't have anything like that now that people see as a destination. So we really want to make this something special, and the waterfront zoning enables us to create that special destination place that we're trying to capture here. So that is really all I had to say today, but we're probably a couple months away from an agreement with our developer. So this is a piece in that process that the waterfront zoning would be approved so that we can create this special mix of uses down at Osprey Point. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you for that, Randy and Jacob and everyone involved. Any questions or comments from the council?
Yeah, I've got a couple. So I'll start with, can you kind of walk me through, I'm guessing this is for Randy, how significantly different this would be from, say, Columbia Point across the river?
Yeah, Columbia Columbia Point, to me, it's kind of a nice place to go down for a walk, have a meal, but you don't really feel like going and hanging out there for the day. And here, what we're hoping is that we're gonna have enough mix of uses, you know, for the public market. You might wanna go down there, go through the market, have a meal, walk along the water, and then maybe later there's an event at the amphitheater. So we really want this to be someplace you're gonna go and spend half a day, you know, as opposed to Columbia Point where I think you're going for one use and then you're on your way. So I think Columbia Point, you know, when they began, I think they had visions of that being something a little more than it is. And we want to make sure that this becomes that more spot.
Yeah, I greatly appreciate that. I mean, especially with that concept of the amphitheater, you could really make this something very unique, quite honestly, to the Tri-Cities. So I appreciate that. And then my second question is this a significant or a potentially significant loss in your portfolio to the industrial land? In other words, where will that get displaced? Any potential uses that might need like an industrial, you know, it's called a marine terminal, right? So if there was a marine based company that needed it, is there another place, another parcel where they could have that water, road, rail access in the port's portfolio?
Right, and that's a great question, Pete, and I really appreciate that because we do see prime industrial land being displaced to gentrification across the state, across the country, really, as you've seen in California. You know, if you were to go down here and look at the water, you would see that it's very shallow along Osprey Point. This side of the river, unless you've dredged it, this is not the navigation channel of the river, so it's difficult to do. But what we've done in our master plan for all of Big Pasco, and you're only seeing the very western portion of that here, is on the eastern part, we have an area that we call the expansion area that would be for those businesses that would, in the future, possibly need waterfront access. And that again, would involve some dredging to make that work for them. But we've reserved some very large tracts over there for that sort of development if that came along. And then of course, with we did just buy some property up north of Pasco, our Ryman Industrial Center, that would be for other large industry, not necessarily the waterborne industry, but we have that rail highway access at Ryman Industrial Center.
Thanks, Randy. I really appreciate that because, I mean, I love the idea of bringing this type of development to the Tri-Cities. Quite frankly, I really love it being in Pasco, you know, not to be selfish. But I also appreciate that you're also thinking about, okay, well, we're displacing this as a potential industrial use. So where else can we, you know, compensate for that? So thank you for that.
Is Councilmember Alvarado?
Yes, Mr. Alvarado.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And then I guess this question perhaps is more for Mr. Gonzalez. My question is in opening up this new type of zoning, do we see potential of this being applicable to other parts of the city or mainly only here?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to try and, I don't want to use the word test, but work with the Port of Pasco and through the regulations that they provide and sort of the safety net that they provide with the port as a good collaborative partner to really test this out. There's obviously a lot of interest in this type of development. And I think locating here at Osprey Point is a great opportunity. And I think what it also does is begin to, when we think long-term and kind of zoom out, we look at what's going on around the city, but particularly we got some exciting development along the Blue Ridge on 20th and A Street. We've got continued growth with the Port of Pasco along the airport, 20th Avenue near Columbia Basin College, and also all of the effort and activity and funding going towards downtown Pasco. And when you zoom out, you begin to kind of see a few activity corridors. And I think looking at Osprey Point and the waterfront development district, it'll allow us to take a look at the zoning regulations applied there, along with some other plans that we've got ongoing here at the city, and take sort of the best of everything we have available, and I think provide a variety, sort of a toolkit for some of these corridors to begin to utilize land for its most valuable use, and also for one that provides a benefit for the community that's been established there. So yes, I do think that we'll be able to take a few lessons learned from what the results are of Osprey Point, especially as things get going with the interest there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarado. I think this is, I'll go ahead and chime in now. I think this is wonderful and something that's just gonna bring up so many things in Pasco. And, what I'm really excited about is all the years that I've been here is to see the activity going on along the waterfront there in that part of Pasco, and with the new apartment complexes going in, and now with this, I just see this becoming just a wonderful thing that will benefit not only our residents, but many in the region. So Randy and your staff, I appreciate your help on this, and Jacob for all the work you guys are doing. And I couldn't be happier to see that this is something that we can, it's just that much closer, and I think it's going to work, and it's going to be a wonderful addition to our city. So thank you very much for that. Any other comments from council?
Yeah, this is Councilman Milne. Hey, in the past, I've heard about talk about have like a water taxi going from Kennewick to Pasco, like the wine village, and then also go to Howard Amon Park. Is there any kind of talk as far as a concept, as far as in the future, where there would be able to have some kind of boat access or a taxi to go between the 3 points? Any comment?
Yeah, if I can jump in. Yeah, there is lots of talk, Councilman Milne. We're still figuring that out. We have two solutions. One would be the City of Pasco Marina, which is just to the west of the map that you see here. And the other is our container barge slip, which is just to the right of the map that you see here. So either of those locations does permit for a large boat to moor for a taxi service. We could also look at a dock that would go out in the water here, but again, just because of the shallowness of the water, not sure how well that would work. But we really would like to capitalize on the marina with this development and see the marina get some investment and have some nice connections between the marina and this development as well. So I think that could be a good solution.
Okay, thank you.
This is Councilmember Roach, and this question is for Randy. Thank you for presenting this evening, and I was just curious about a previous slide in which parking was addressed. I really like the idea of walkability being encouraged in this area, and so as I'm looking at this on my iPad screen, it's the text is tiny. I couldn't read it even with glasses on, but I'm guessing the gray is parking, but the previous slide had mentioned something about moving parking elsewhere to make maybe more efficient use of the land. So can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, you bet. And parking is it's a big question. It's a great question. We've actually got a design charrette set up with our developer and an urban planner for the month of October with our commission and the developer to talk about the parking. How do we, where do we place it for one thing, so you don't feel like you're coming into a sea of parking when you come into the development. Can you place it off to the side or behind so that the buildings are front and center and you feel like that's the main attraction, not the parking. So I don't think we're going to be a downtown Seattle, downtown Portland, because we're the Tri-Cities and people, generally like to find a parking spot that's not too far away. But somewhere I think there's a happy middle ground of less than we have seen, like at a mall or a strip mall, but more than you'd find in a downtown urban core that would fit the Tri-Cities. And so that will be our goal as we look at the amount of parking that we have. I should say the developer is planning on all of the condominiums to put underground parking there, so the residents' parking would not even be seen as a surface parking.
Thank you. And just curious about the frontage, the pathway on the river, will that be broadened at all? Will the lighting be introduced into the area? How will that look? after
Yeah,
this.
that is, enhancing that walkway is all part of the plan. We share that vision with the developer that we think the more we can enhance the pedestrian amenities and feel to this development, the more successful it will be. So lighting is one of the things that we want to do. Doing something else with the path to make it, wider, allow more people to be on it is part of the plan. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
This is Councilmember Maloney. I have a few questions.
Yes, Mr. Maloney.
And I think it's going to be a shotgun approach, Randy. So you won't. Don't worry about being the only target here. So one of my questions ties in a little bit to I think what Mr. Alvarado had asked earlier, which was, is this going to be used for other areas? And specifically, this is for the Osprey Point location of the port's land. Would this also be applied to the marine terminal location, or would the intention be that there be a separate but similar one? How is that intended?
I'm sorry, who was that question directed to?
Whoever can answer it.
Okay. From the port perspective, yes, I think we would want to apply this to we call it a marine, it has been known as the marine terminal. It's now called the wharf, which is further to the east, right by the Cable Bridge property. Yeah, we would also see a mix of different uses there. Probably that would include more light industrial than you see in this plan for Osprey Point.
Okay, because I know we've had a lot of conversations about that in the recent past, and part of Somos Pasco was really focused much less on Osprey Point, and I think much more on that the wharf. I'll try to update my language. And so I'm interested, and I was kind of surprised to see this coming forward as a preliminary, as the first one out the gate, as opposed to second one down. Excited about the vision, no issues with that. Just want to make sure I understood. Are we going to be able to pick this up, more or less apply it?
And Mr. Maloney, I might just add that the waterfront district encompasses entirely port property. So if it were to be expanded elsewhere, we would certainly reserve the right to take a much finer tuned approach to the permitted uses, the development standards, et cetera, if it were to be either east or west of the proposed Osprey Point site.
Thank you. I appreciate that. One of my questions was regarding public access and park access, and I appreciate that looks great. And I assume that concept for the park a little bit away from the river as well would be public access. So that's fantastic. One of my other questions is regarding usage, and there's some email exchange, but I didn't get an answer before this meeting, so I'll ask it again here. Mr. White, maybe you can weigh in on this one as well. So one thing in our downtown core, we specifically exclude taverns or other alcohol establishments that aren't specifically a restaurant, unless some very specific and odd criteria are met. However, we know that for the sake of tourism, for example, things like wine bars are where you might have multiple wineries having a tasting room location in a specific area. And as close as we could seem to find was that perhaps it was covered under restaurants, but I believe Washington State code considers restaurants and things like taverns or as separate entities to a large extent. Can we speak at all about whether or not that would be a permitted use in this area?
I can speak to that. We have specifically listed that wineries and breweries are permitted uses, as well as restaurants and similar establishments. There's no intent to exclude bars or taverns in that area through this zoning code as we've presented it. And it is prohibited in one specific zoning district it's called out, but there's several others where it is allowed. And so we'll work with the city just to make sure that the ordinance is exactly where we need to have it. But to answer your question, there's no intent to exclude those types of uses from there. That would be those would all be part of the mix. Mm-hmm.
Great. I think of like a Brews Tap House and how successful that location has been, and may want to expand at some point in time. This would be just a fantastic place as part of a walkable, livable community where you have event space tied in with all sorts of amenities like a public market. The other question I had was in regards to height limits, and I know we've had conversations about adjusting height limits across the city, and this particular area is of specific interest to me in terms of why we're establishing a height requirement that's outside of fire code and others. To the north of this is purely industrial land, so we're not exactly blocking anyone's view if we were to build up instead of something else. So this zoning suggestion has a 60-foot height limit for non-residential buildings or I guess individual residential buildings, and I think a 45 for residential buildings. Why are we prescribing a height restriction at all for an area like this?
So development regulations and specifically bulk and dimensional regulations are typically crafted just to create a certain scale. In this case, I would say it was probably a pedestrian-friendly scale is part of what's being considered here. And having those types of regulations in place, make sure that there's compatibility through different, phases of a project or different parts of a project. If you did have multiple developers, for example. So that was the reason I believe that they've included some of the height restrictions. And that part of the piece did come from a different consultant that came up with these standards, but they were looking at similar places in terms of that vision, and they were looking at examples and what those height restrictions are in other places. So that's how it came about.
Because I would be interested in whether that should be revisited a little bit and looking at that, because when we're talking about high density, low parking, et cetera, some of that does become with height. This height looks like it's very similar to the maximum height restrictions we have in other commercial zoning across the city. And maybe I'm misremembering that. Mr. White, maybe you could help educate me a little bit more on how this fits into our overall city code.
Oh, yes, Mr. Maloney, it's significantly higher than the height restriction in our commercial zones or our residential zones.
So if I understood, the only issue would be that it would change the character of this if someone were to build too high?
Well, I'm attempting to answer your question, council member, about why you would have height restrictions in the first place. I mean, there could be life safety issues, certainly those types of things, but I think that a lot of probably what drove these height limitations and the numbers that you see is just talking about, the vision for the area and making sure that it's at the certain kind of scale and quality of development that you would want to see down near a waterfront with a mixture of different uses. So you'd want to keep things kind of, to a certain scale and a certain character, and that's why you would have those bulk and dimensional limitations.
I'll pipe in there a little bit too. We may want to look at that after this too, because I know our developer here, those are 6-story buildings along the water, and those 3 in the middle, I believe, were 7 or 8 stories. So we want to make sure that that's going to conform. But I think also if you're looking at other parts of the city where maybe you're not in a industrial area where you are blocking views, if you were looking at the Road 100 area, for example, that might be more something you want to do there. So this is at some point, I think, going to be something the city would want to broaden to other areas of the city that may not have the same characteristics of our site, where that height, the heights that you got in there might be a better fit for those other areas.
Right, so I guess I just encourage that, Mr. Hayden, if that's something the port is interested in. I believe in the staff report on this item, 4 stories is as high as you can go, approximately.
I'll get with Mr. White and we'll look over that.
I just wanted to add a few words too. I'm looking at the proposed code right now, and it is 60 feet for multifamily as would be permitted. And I think that our existing special permit process, which allows exceptions to the height, might also be applicable to the waterfront district. But yeah, I think obviously it'd be fruitful for us to meet and make sure that what we've got in terms of permitted heights would be appropriate. I think the one thing we want to be considerate of, and although I don't think any of the proposed footprints on the buildings on the site plan that you see in front of you are within that buffer, we do have to be aware of the shoreline management plan and the 200-foot, I believe 200-foot height restrictions along that area. So we just want to be mindful of that as well.
Of course, absolutely. So last question, Mr. Gonzalez, I think you may be best primed to answer this one. There was specific to conversation about amount of land taken up by parking across cities and how that has become perhaps unmanageable in certain areas. I'm not going to put you on the spot right now, so don't worry, this is not a pop quiz, I promise. Could you send me a later and give me an idea of what about the percentage of parking is for City of Pasco specifically?
I don't have that on me, but we'll get that to you and the rest of council soon.
Sometime in the future, Mr. Gonzalez, thank you. That's all I had. Thank you so much for answering my questions and considering my recommendations. Thank you for that, Mr. Maloney. I think it's a point well taken. And I was looking forward to make sure we do it right the first time. But what I got out of that conversation was that in the event that there was an opportunity to go higher, I mean, there's also a special permit process to be able to do that. Is that right, Mr. Gonzalez?
Yes, that's correct. And if it's not easily noticeable in the proposed code, we can certainly make revisions to it to make it a little bit easier for the reader.
Okay.
So, this is Councilmember Roach, and I wanted to just ask one more question about the amphitheater, actually two. Wanting to know what the capacity is of the amphitheater and wanting to know if it is, because it's an amphitheater, it suggests outdoor. So is it only intended for use during spring to fall, or is there additional capacity at other times of the year?
So I don't know the capacity of the amphitheater. I will tell you that I can answer the second part of your question. The big square that's turned 45 degrees is also an indoor event theater that has a 6,000 seat capacity. So that would obviously be able to be used year round. And again, at this point, these are concepts. I think the developer thinks that's a great idea. Whether or not that is the final use of that property remains to be seen. But if it does come to pass, he's thinking more on the scale of the Gorge Amphitheater and has said that this property has more acreage than the Gorge. So that's the type of concert venue he is seeing here and the type of entertainment that he's seeing for this location.
Wow, that would be really exciting to have that sort of a venue here in Pasco.
Yeah.
Okay. So was that all, Ms. Councilwoman Roach? Okay. So, Mr. Gonzalez, so when is the timeline if to move this forward? Would it be in the next meeting? I thought you mentioned a date.
Yeah, well, we certainly want to have more discussions with the port and Nicole and make sure that what we've got in the proposal is exactly what they're asking for. So we just want to we'll do another comb through and make sure it's appropriate and then bring that back for council likely. Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, for the formal adoption of the of the code amendment. However, the implementation of it would not be permitted until the comprehensive plan receive certification from Franklin County this fall.
Yeah. So there's time, Mr. Mayor. We'll get with the port and it'll come back to council either within 1 week or perhaps 3 weeks for a formal recommendation.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for the presentation. I didn't mention Nicole. Nicole, thank you for providing input as well. If there's no further questions or comments, and we're looking forward to continuing this and coming back with final product. So thank you very much. All right, so next we'll move right along to item 5B, resolution delegating authority to staff for easement / right-of-way acquisition. Mr. Worley, are you with us tonight?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Tonight, we wanted to be able to have a discussion with council about an opportunity to possibly delegate some limited authority to staff for the acquisition of easements and right-of-ways. And so I'll give you a little bit of background and then talk a little bit about what the resolution proposes. As most everybody knows, that in the development of public improvement, such as parks and streets and utilities, the acquisition of right-of-way or easements is often necessary. And in order to do that, there are several different ways that those properties or property rights can be acquired. In the information that we presented to you in your packet, we've identified some types of right-of-way acquisitions. One of them is called a partial taking, where we would either take like a strip of land or a corner of a piece of property. A strip of land might be in an area where we would widen a road or extend a utility, something along those lines, often alongside the existing right-of-way. And corners are often at intersections where we may need to make ADA improvements, and we need to acquire the corner of a property in order to make the curve of the sidewalk and the ADA ramp fit within that intersection. The other type of acquisition that we get into is a full parcel acquisition. And these are the types that often are used to construct lift stations and pump stations, or buildings or parks, or expansions or pollution control facilities. So those are fairly large acquisitions. The other type of acquisition that we typically get into on projects are easements. And there are two types of easements that we face. Some of them are permanent easements, like when we have utilities run through properties and we need to install them, we need to maintain them, we need to be able to get access to them. And so those are permanent easements. And then there are what's called temporary easements, and that allows for the construction of the utilities across private property. And so it's temporary during construction, and once construction is completed, then the temporary easement goes away, and typically the permanent easement is what is remaining. So in most of our projects, they have some form of right-of-way acquisition, a partial take, a full take, or easements. And so tonight, we wanted to be able to talk about this with council, and the proposed resolution that you have before you tonight would delegate limited authority to the city manager to perform these type of acquisitions under council-approved capital projects, which are part of the adopted CIP or the approved budget. And the intent is to streamline the process and make it more effective. The idea being that if council has agreed to the movement of a project going forward, whether it be a park, a utility, a street project, if acquisition of right-of-way is associated with that, then the idea would be this resolution would authorize the city manager to acquire those right-of-ways or easements up to the already approved authority of $300,000. Anything above that, or if there are more complicated or larger acquisitions, especially the kind that might require a relocation of a property owner, then those would always come to council. And so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, open it up for discussion. And if city manager is able, would like to add anything to that, that'd be great.
If I could, and good evening, Mayor and Council. So Steve had talked about some exceptions. One of those would be condemnation. That's a power reserved for the council and not something you could delegate. So those would still, under this proposal, come back to you. And as Steve said, if we're relocating folks particularly using federal dollars to do it, my own comfort level would we want to come back to you anyway. So this is really more about vacant land to execute on capital projects.
Thank you, Mr. for that clarification, because that was my main concern, is that when it comes to people's personal property, then I think that's very critical. That, I mean, that's a whole different way of going. So
yeah, any transaction that would occur under this resolution would be, we reached an agreement with the property owner. If we came to a point where we couldn't reach agreement and we had to discuss condemnation, we'd be talking to council in executive session.
Okay, so, up to $300,000.
That's correct.
All right, any questions or comments from the council?
Yeah, this is Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Mr. Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Mayor, I had similar questions and concerns about, as soon as we start talking about taking, it's easy to envision that can go very wrong sometimes, often by people's misinterpretation of what that really looks like. But people have it's important to respect private property rights. Mr. Zabel and Mr. Worley, when I'm looking at this, I was trying to understand exactly what the limitations were. And I heard you, Mr. Worley, say that it was for capital projects that previously approved capital projects, but I don't see that actually in words of the resolution. And so I'm trying to understand what the scope and scale of this is. When we're talking about $300,000 of land, as a for instance, I think with the going rate of acreage, we're talking about several acres of land, which is now something that if it's vacant land. So now we're talking about something that's a very large acquisition. We're not just simply talking about an additional corner at, like on Court Street or something like that. We're looking at a small expansion. We're looking at pretty large expansion. So can you tell me more a little bit about what are the limitations built in this resolution?
Yeah, to give you an example, I think that might help describe that is you may be familiar with the Columbia East Force Main project, where we are trying to get some force mains from the Columbia East lift station up to the processed water reuse facility. And in that project, we have to run the pipes through some vacant property right now that will be developed in the future. And so we worked with the property owner, and they're going to develop it. So we located the pipes where it fit best within their property. And so what we wanted to acquire was a permanent easement to be able to put those in there, which will fall underneath a future road when they go to develop. And that project there with an easement, because typically easements, we pay about 50 cents on the dollar for the value of that, because the property owner still gets to be able to use that property and he still owns it. We just have an underground utility on that property. And so we pay less than market value, or a discounted portion of the market value. But that might cost on the order of $175,000 for that project. So that type of situation would fall under the delegation of this authority if we have a willing property owner willing to give us an easement. And that would fall under the delegation being proposed here. Now, if that property owner decided that they didn't want to give it and we absolutely needed it, then as City Manager Zabel mentioned, then anytime we get into a situation like that and we need to go through a potential condemnation process, then we would automatically bring that to council for review and approval.
I think some other examples on the complexity, or at least another example would be commercial property. Sometimes we're talking, say on Road 68, we're talking property of upwards of $20 per square foot if it's on a road right away. And if it's impacting parking, that could put a premium on that well as well if you wind up taking a couple parking spots. But if you need it for traffic signal equipment or to add a lane to a project that's approved by the council, that's sort of what this is for. It's not necessarily to go out there and look at some of the large tracts where maybe we can get land for $1 or $2 a foot. $300,000 is going to buy a significant amount of acreage. I guess the other point in the $300,000 fair market value, that's the delegation of authority, and we came up with that amount. That's the delegation of authority that already exists for professional service agreements, small works, public works projects under $300,000, those type of things. And so it's kind of out there as a matter of consistency, and frankly, $300,000 isn't that hard to hit. And as Director Worley had mentioned, this is for projects that council's already aware of. It's in your biennial budget, and the expectation that council and staff makes progress on those.
I appreciate all that. I guess, and when I'm just doing a plain reading of the language in the resolution, I'm not necessarily seeing that all those words that you're saying are something that I read. And so I just want to make sure the language is tight here. This is one of those areas that can be really controversial, and this is the sort of thing that hits the paper, and that's what we're, as a council, are supposed to be, paying attention to and hearing. And so I just want to make sure that our language is really as precise as that. Mr. Zabel, I very much trust you to not put us in bad stead by, doing some sort of $299,000 land grab for the city. That's by no means what I'm suggesting. But when the language is written, it seems fairly vague, and I just want to make sure that we're really, that the resolution is really stating clearly that intent as we're passing this, just because it's such an important aspect of what the cities do.
We will put some clarifying language in there regarding budgeted projects and some of the other qualifiers we added, and certainly, I'll add that this resolution, once it's in place, is in place. Certainly, council can change it later, or future councils can change it, but that's going to be the operating template until it is changed. And so I understand that, and feel a responsibility that not only this has to work for the current staff, it has to work for future staff as well. So, and you don't know the future staff. So we want to make sure that whatever we put in place is something that this council and future councils can have some confidence in. And I will share with you that we've been operating somewhat under this, although not necessarily with the $300,000, but during my time here, because it's the way the city's always done it. The city manager has exercised authority, and far prior to my time, on picking up pieces of right-of-way and so forth. We went through the whole Oregon Avenue Phase 1 project. Basically, those parcels were authorized on my authority while I was here, assuming that we had a policy in place. This is a fairly common policy. And in discussions with the Public Works Director and the city attorney recently, we started asking the question, where is that authority and what's the limit on the authority? And we found that authority kind of doesn't exist. Yeah, which is why you see one of the conditions in there, section 5, where the council affirms and ratifies all past actions taken by the city manager and city staff related to acquisitions or rights of way and easements and so forth. So that's part of how we got to where we're at. And this gets us a policy, I think. We can certainly talk about the limit, and we can certainly add the clarifying language, but this gets us a policy, I think, that really spells out what staff has the authority to do and not to do, and adds that comfort level for council, and is something that future staff and councils can operate under. So that's our intent.
Thank you, Mr. Zabel. I appreciate that. I wasn't going to call you out for section 5, but I did notice it. So I appreciate the sentiment. I understand why we're trying to do this, and I'm not opposed to the action as long as we're making sure that it is watertight for the future. Thank you.
So any changes go ahead, Councilwoman Roach.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate Councilman Maloney bringing up the question, and Dave Zabel, you took it to the place where I was intending on going, which was, relinquishing our authority as city council to you. But while we have faith in you, we also know that at some point in the long future from now, you plan on retiring many years from now. So, but what then? And we have no way of knowing who that next city council might be, or a city manager might be, and whether that fits for that time in the future. So wanting to be really careful and responsible in how we handle that decision for our future council and staff.
Thank you, Councilwoman Roach. When do you plan on bringing this back to council?
Well, our thought was, depending on feedback, I don't think we'd have much difficulty tuning up the language to make it a little more clear along the lines we've discussed tonight, and we could have it back to you at your next regular meeting.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments by council? All right, well, thank you for that. Mr. Worley and Mr. Zabel, I'm looking forward to looking at the final product and then bringing it to the next meeting for approval or disapproval. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to the next item, which is resolution for the interlocal agreement with Franklin County. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I skipped one. Resolution amendment to interlocal agreement with Mid-Columbia Libraries. Mr. Radkai.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Good evening, Zach Ratkai, Administrative and Community Services Director. So 10 years ago, the city of Pasco entered into an ILA with our interlocal agreement with Mid-Columbia Libraries to provide library location and services to the community. It's an ongoing agreement. The term of this current agreement expires on December 31st, 2020, so at the end of this year. Contained within the ILA were stipulations on conditions of service, provision of library materials and staff to serve the community, as well as locations from which the library will be based. The primary location, or the main branch, is at 120 West Hopkins Street. It's a city-owned facility. City's in charge of capital maintenance and operations of the building itself, whereas the library is in charge of the operations within the building. For this main facility, there is a shared usage clause where the city may use the library for common meeting space as needed, schedule permitting. This agreement also outlines the district is, we also outline that the district agreed to rent, maintain, and staff a branch in the western portion of the city. This is at a location currently found at 7525 Wrigley Drive, and it's been in operation since April of 2013. The West Pasco branch is not a city-owned facility, so the building is not city-owned. The city has no maintenance and operations responsibility for the facility. The resolution attached ratifies or proposes to ratify an amendment to request a one-year extension of the current ILA with a new expiration date of December 31st, 2021. This proposed extension will allow sufficient time for each party to examine the tenets of the original agreement, determine a collective future based upon current needs, and explore the potential for shared facilities in the future, as well as potential expansion for services. In a sense, with this agreement sunsetting at the end of 2020, with the pandemic impacting operations both at the city and the library, both parties were not able to reach and talk about the agreement in this year. So we propose to buy another year and work on it in 2021 with a new agreement coming forth to council within the new year.
All right, thank you, Mr. Radke. I appreciate the relationship we've had with the Columbia District Mid-Columbia Library, and Kyle Cox as the CEO.
Yes.
Yeah, it's been a great relationship, and I have no problems with the extension, considering what's happened this year and all the different things they've had to do to accommodate our community and our citizens. I'm in agreement with this. So any questions or comments from council that you'd like to share or add?
This is Councilmember Roach, and I just have a couple questions. I like the Mid-Columbia Library. I think they do a good job. I'm just curious about whether there's actually any other library system that even could provide this sort of service for us in Pasco. Is there a competition to even consider a different contract outside of MCL? And also just curious as to, the city of Richland does not participate in MCL, and so kind of wondering what and how they do it over there in comparison.
Well, in speaking to your first question, Councilmember Roach, the City of Richland library system is really the only competitor in the region for us here at the City of Pasco. So really Mid-Columbia Library is just the main provider of this service in the community. As far as Richland's operations of their own library, we could certainly take a look into some of the details there and bring it back to council next week.
Thank you, that'd be great.
Thank you, Councilmember
Maloney.
Yes, Mr. Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Ratkai, I know we set in our goals doing a parks and facilities kind of master planning effort probably next year, I imagine. And part of that was outreach about what sort of a future community center and other facilities. Is the expectation that a discussion over whether or not additional library space or a moved library space might be part of that shared location?
Yes, Councilman, we're happy to answer that. The very preliminary fledgling discussions have begun with the library as far as any intentions or future shared facilities there. So the library is definitely within that conversation, and certainly something we'll be bringing up in the new contract negotiations next year.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. Any other questions or comments? All right, well, Mr. Ratke, thank you. Looking forward to some information that you'll provide and putting it on the agenda whenever we're ready.
We'll see you next week.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you, council. Once again, we'll move on to our last item, 5D, which is the resolution for the interlocal agreement with Franklin County for jail services. Mr. Roski, Chief Roski, are you on the line tonight?
Chief Roski is not available. This is Captain Harpster.
Oh.
If you have any questions, I think Eric Ferguson was going to lead a discussion on this with Mr. Zabel.
Oh, okay.
That's the information that I had.
Well, good evening, Mr. Harpster, and
questions?
thank you for that, Mr. Zabel. Do you want to?
I guess I'll kick it off then. So our prior jail agreement expired end of December of last year, and so the department's been in negotiations with Franklin County Sheriff's Office, and Franklin County looking to update that, and have negotiated this agreement. I'm going to turn it over to City Attorney in just a second here to talk a little bit about some of the specifics, but in terms of rate, you can see that rate continues to go up. It's still, we have looked at alternatives. That's still a very reasonable rate. And the thing with Franklin County, outside of the proximity to the city police department facility and our court, is that if we were to move some of our prisoners someplace else, that rate would probably have to go up even more, because the costs at the jail are pretty fixed. I mean, that's kind of the way it works. They have to have so many corrections officers there and so much administration and those type of things. So you really can't do much about that rate except work with the jail the best we can to try to maintain a efficient operation. Some of the things where we can make a difference is how we utilize that jail. And then, of course, the medical has become a huge issue over the course of the past decade or so. So when we have folks incarcerated, awaiting trial is a little bit different than when we have them incarcerated after trial. The use of Medicare, Medicaid, those type of things that folks are on, and making sure we're taking advantage of those type of programs for those that qualify with them. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric, because I know there was a lot of back and forth with the county prosecutor's office on this, and maybe you can walk us through some of the nuances of that. And then I'll just touch on the finance piece of it at the end.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Mr. Ferguson, good evening.
Okay, good. Yes, this was a long process that was started late last year, and it took quite a bit of I guess kind of back and forth to really kind of figure out. I mean, everybody knew that we needed to make this work and really kind of address some of the ongoing concerns from the last contract. The big portions that we really needed to go over and make sure everybody was clear on and really agreed on and using properly was most notably Section 6, medical cost and treatment. As Mr. Zabel pointed out, there's a lot of nuance. There's some case law that makes it clear that that you need to have an agreement with your jail provider for medical services, depending on the stage of the prosecution or the detention prior to or after sentencing. So that really is a really fine nuance that we had to make sure that we were clear on, that really respected both the city's needs to make sure that when they've got folks that are being held on city charges that they would be responsible for those medical costs prior to any disposition. At that point, if they're serving time on a city charge, they would still remain on our issue. They would still remain, I believe, I don't want to talk out of school here, but I believe, because Mr. Briggs in our office really spent most of the time with the section, but really what it comes down to is the biggest expense that we had to watch out for was related to when folks are being held on city charges. They've been arrested by the city of Pasco and they're awaiting the disposition of their felony charges, at which point they would then go on to the state system because they would obviously be convicted of a state crime, and then they've been convicted and now they become their responsibility. So that really needed to be gone over with a fine-tooth comb, and I think we've got everybody on the same page and know exactly what those situations look like. We also have a very clear procedure now for when the city would want to potentially release somebody to be able to obtain those medical services rather than incur those costs. For example, if somebody's being held on a very minor charge, that they would be able to potentially be released on their own recognizance to be able to receive that very expensive medical procedure. We would want to make sure that they had the opportunity to do that so that the city taxpayers wouldn't have to eventually take up that. The other thing that we really wanted to focus on too is to make sure that the county used all the efforts that they could to recoup some of these costs on our behalf, was related to if a particular prisoner was being held, had their own insurance, or if they were on some other program that would allow those costs to be reimbursed. So that was a big portion of the negotiations. Some of the other issues, and they're kind of interrelated, but the other big sticking point that really took a lot of work on behalf of our office as well as the county was the indemnification, Section 14. It is very nuanced. It's very precise in how it's been drafted. And I do want to make sure everybody's aware of the potential exposures. We think that it is one of those necessary situations where the city is going to have to have some exposure through this indemnification, because it is a county facility and we are putting not only our employees in the forms of not only police officers but firemen who respond in that facility, and the county would really have a lot of people working inside their facility in some pretty intense, dangerous situations. So we believe that the indemnification statute, it is, to be completely frank, it is a little lopsided on the county's behalf, because it's their facility and we've got employees going in there, and there's some weird nuances. I won't drag you through it at 8:24 at night, but there's some very weird situations whereby the city, because these would be our employees, the county could be exposed to our ability. If something happened in the jail to one of our employees, we could potentially hide behind their indemnification through workers' compensation insurance program. And so we've waived that, and that's a big deal. We don't do that lightly. Most of the time when that's done, it's done mutually, and in this case it is not. We've waived that because our employees are going to be entering their facility, and they haven't reciprocated with that, and we've gone through that in all those scenarios where that could potentially have the city in a situation where we would be kind of stuck holding the bag, and quite frankly, it's suboptimal, but understanding the fact that it's their facility and we've got our employees going into it and working essentially in their facility, it does make sense. I have spoken at length with Mr. Johnson over at the county and understand what their goal is with it, and recommend that in this very narrow particular situation that we would agree to that. So there's that, and then believe one of the other things that was a little interesting was there was a provision that was added that we don't know exactly what the concern was, but the county wanted to retain the ability that if they felt like they had essentially a conflict with a particular prisoner, that they would retain the right, the sheriff would retain the right to decline to receive that prisoner for some kind of familial relationship or some other relationship that they felt they didn't would feel was appropriate to have that person housed in their facility. So they retain that right, and those are the biggies. But anything other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
This is Councilmember Roach, and I have a question for you. I toured the Franklin County Jail in 2018, and it was under construction, had several repairs that needed to be addressed, ceilings with leaks and flooding through the floor, and certain areas not able to be used. And so I also know there was some federal judge oversight in its renovation or its lack of certification. And so I'm just wondering from a city perspective, if there's any liability there in whether it's for our city staff that are going there on work, on duty, or even from an inmate perspective. Do we have anything to be cautious or be concerned about from that perspective? Is that work there in that physical facility done?
Yeah, so the law of premises liability would still apply in this situation, meaning that the moment that folks are in their care in their facility, they become liable if they have some kind of negligent situation in that particular facility, which is also why they wanted to retain some of those abilities when our officers are working inside their facility with very dangerous people. So for example, when an officer brings somebody in and they're going through the booking process, that person, they're in their facility, but they're technically still in our custody. So that creates a very unique liability situation. And until that, the way this is defined is until that prisoner has been properly received by the booking officer at the jail and is in their 100% custody, they don't take that on. And so that was something that is very interesting, where you're really having two separate functions kind of interrelating. You're literally having somebody who's in the care of one of our officers and then goes into the county facility, and then that person is then subsequently processed by our officer, partially by our officer, until he or she's received by the county. So this agreement tries to very, very precisely define when that transfer takes place and when that liability transfers with the particular individual. So to answer your question, your first part of your question, once the prisoner is in their care, they're obviously very much responsible for any kind of negligent activity or anything that would go on in that facility.
And that said, let me interject here that the city is going to assure that its prisoners are kept in a safe manner. So between now and when we bring this back to you next week, we'll make sure that the issues that you discussed, Councilmember Roach, and the remodel work is complete.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Roach. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, this is Councilman Milne, and I had a question. I know because of COVID, when people get, say, caught for like theft, they don't go to jail. We've had that happen at our store a couple times where we've caught them and then they're immediately released. How many people are in jail that the city is paying for at the moment? And has COVID played any kind of issues with the pricing on all this?
COVID hasn't necessarily played any pricing, but it has had a fiscal impact on us, whereas our jail days are down for the very reasons Councilmember Milne you just discussed, and which we have seen as much as $1.5 million a year for jail costs related to just the beds. Bed days is what they're referred to as, and we've been averaging probably closer to 1 million, and this year we're probably going to be a little less than that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Milne. Any other questions or comments?
This is Councilmember Maloney. Just real quick, I want to ask about the, I mean, I know that the part of the jail and some of the other facilities were paid out of the law and justice tax that the voters paid for or approved, I think, gosh, probably closing in on a decade ago now, but that additional 0.3% sales tax. I know that there's a portion that, I know it's split between county and city. I'd be interested in understanding what the accounting of that is. When we look at, for example, the city paying, separately for individual inmates, understanding that we are the massive amount of the sales tax in the county, I think is a relevant topic here. And so I'm very interested in understanding what exactly that breakdown is, and are we really given the fact that we're disproportionately paying for the facility anyways, are we being disproportionately impacted by the cost of those inmates as well? This sounds like a pretty unfair, it could be a very unfair way that we're being treated by the county, and that would not necessarily shock me in certain fiscal situations given the county's approach to the city on a number of issues.
And that's certainly something we can look at, Councilmember Maloney, and certainly the rest of the council members. Is that something you would want to have a better understanding of before you take action, or is that something we can do a little bit separately? Because I don't know if I can pull all that together prior to next week. But we do have an expired jail agreement.
Any comments, Mr. Maloney?
When I look at an 18% increase in costs and then an additional 5% increases per year, when we're looking at the fact that sales tax within the city of Pasco is increasing, our taxable sales revenue is in general increasing. We're paying more and more for the facility through our citizens, our residents, our community members are paying more and more for the facility through an existing tax. And then for us to additionally be paying for out of the general fund, it's concerning to me. I'd like to understand better why this is okay to see such a large increase when we're seeing a proportional increase in sales tax paid by Pascoites. So I'm interested in understanding that before moving forward. I'm one of 7 votes. I'm interested in the rest of the council, but that's my perspective right now.
Okay, we will do what we can, get that information back to council as quick as possible.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Anybody else? Okay, well, pending that information, we'll see when that can get put on at the next regular meeting. All right, well, thank you for that. Next on the agenda item is miscellaneous council discussion. Mr. Zabel, do you have anything? I just want to give real quickly a shout out. I'm really big on supporting our local small businesses, and I just happened to run into Delicious Crepes and Waffles over, it's a new trailer, a new mobile food vendor that's located at the Hapo Center parking lot. And I just want to do a shout out to them because they had a nice, clean operation, and everybody was social distancing, using masks, and their food was phenomenal. So I just wanted to give a shout out to them. Anybody else?
Mr. Zabel, I was just wondering if you could give us an update on code amendment as it pertains to murals. And then as well as just an update on our Arts Commission, when they're meeting, where they're at in meeting, and that's what I have so far.
Certainly, and I'm going to ask Rick White, Director White, to talk a little bit about the code amendment. I know that's something that he's had a consultant working on and preparing that. As council's aware, we have some pretty distinct areas in the city. Right now we have one sign code, kind of a one-size-fits-all sign code. So I'm gonna kick that over to Director White for a few minutes to talk about that.
Thank you, Mr. Zabel. And yes, obviously, The sign code project is a very, very big project. And the first phase of the sign code update was an inventory of existing sign code regulations where our consultant tried to make sense out of what our existing code says. And it's very difficult because the existing code was very poorly written and contradictory in many instances. However, she has done that and has provided a report to staff that we will share with the Planning Commission at the October Planning Commission meeting. And it's strictly an academic exercise. It's associated with, here's how I think the sign code should be arranged. Then there's a second part to the sign code amendment, and that would occur pending budget approval in 2021. The second phase would involve actual engagement of public participants, special interest groups, the Planning Commission, probably an ad hoc special commission of some sort to develop specific signage regulations that are appropriate in 2021 as they are, or they would have been in 2006 when the version of the sign code was adopted. The second phase of the sign code update will definitely include an area-wide signage focus. So as Dave mentioned, our existing sign code has regulations appropriate citywide in a flat scale. That is probably and likely not appropriate. The downtown signage needs are very, very different from, let's say, the Court Street or Road 68 or Broadmoor signage needs. One of the specific tasks of the consultant in phase 2 of the contract was to develop area-wide specific signage regulations for consideration. So that will be occurring again, pending budget approval in 2021. And I would expect that murals, for example, that may be applied on a downtown basis would not be the same that would be applied, for example, on Road 68. On Road 68, you have massive wall square footages with many of the big box retailers that simply wouldn't accommodate a sign code that relates murals to wall size that would be appropriate on a downtown scale. So in essence, short summary, but in essence, we're on the conclusion of the academic exercise of making sure our sign code makes sense once it's organized into what is appropriate for future regulations.
So regarding any questions of Rick first?
Just wondering if there's anything within the downtown as this pertains to downtown in expediting that process, and not just kind of like getting, having to slog through 2 years of citywide sign code work.
And if I understand your question, there's no specific shortcuts pertaining to downtown, and I would recommend that council approach a shortcut with caution based on the complexities, and believe me, we haven't had a controversial issue yet, except for recently, but we haven't had a controversial issue with signage. And it can be very, very polarizing, and I would encourage council to consider the public input in regards to special ad hoc committees or planning commission or whatever the case may be in determining for determining the proposed regulations before we come up with any predetermined decision.
Thank you, Rick. I'll take that to heart.
This is Councilmember Alvarado. I have a question, I guess, as it pertains to process. I think, as council members, we have kind of, we're limited by process and by the way that, city operates. And so I think, I'm wondering, let's say we did want to make some changes. It seems like it's a 2-year process to, like kind of a 2-year cycle when we do our plans. Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly? Or is there, I guess, from a perspective of a council member, let's say I wanted to make some changes tomorrow, how, the likelihood of that, or what kind of, I guess, what kind of environment do I need to kind of operate under?
Well, I'm not sure it would be a 2-year process. I mean, half of the work is currently done almost. And when we reconvene, assuming budget adoption in 2021, it might be another year, let's say, to the end of 2021, where we might have a presentation that council can consider in its entirety. Is that along the lines of your question, Mr. Alvarado?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm more, let's say we wanted to cowboy the process as a council, just as a hypothetical. How what are the limits of council's authority to do things like that? Just not that I'm trying to do that. I want to do that. I'm just curious. This is just something new to me. I don't necessarily know how to go about a process like that.
No, I understand now. Okay, thank you. Actually, what I would suggest is that the last thing we want to do is create non-conforming uses. So we wouldn't want to adopt code regulations now that in the end result would be contrary to what our final regulations would be. That's a whole nother can of worms, and it's probably not an area where we want to go. But I think that if council wanted to take a look at very, very specific instances of sign code regulations, we could do that. Again, recalling that the consultant will be, who has experience in murals specifically, will be engaging in a area-specific drafting of regulations that might be appropriate for the geographies within the city.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. White. I think that there is certainly, we can look at different cities and probably even look at different case law of, where this goes well and where it doesn't go well. And so obviously we want to do it right in Pasco. So I'm not advocating for us to let's just do this, knee-jerk thing. But I do want to get it right. But I also want it to be something that is, as we look at this, if it's what's right for Pasco, and I don't know how much of a public engagement aspect there would be to the consultant and the things that will come out of that. And I don't know if that's the most appropriate. I know that once you're dealing with content and freedom of speech and things of that nature, that's where it gets real tricky. But I certainly, I guess as a council member, do want to, I guess, just to encourage staff to, to put some, I guess, some thought into how this could be a collaborative effort, especially using our arts committee that we've created.
Yes, and actually a number of people outside of the Arts Commission have already weighed in on wanting to be included in the second phase of the sign code update, including special interest groups, billboards, and Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you, Mr. White.
This is Councilmember Maloney. Mr. White, I have a little bit of a follow-up. I understand that perhaps we haven't run into a big controversial issue except for a little bit of what we're seeing very recently. But I take a little bit of exception to that. I mean, we have chased out a business out of downtown and eat hot tamales. I was in no question in my conversations with her and Mr. White and Mr. Zabel. I've informed you this in the past. The signage that Eat Hot Tamales had put up on their window was determined to be non-compliant because it was in total covering more than a certain fraction. It looked beautiful. It looked completely functional. This business is now in Kennewick. So this happened several years ago, and this is so I don't necessarily accept that we are not under a current problem right now. We are losing businesses and we're upsetting our community. And so I feel like perhaps there are some tailored ways we can have some wins here, some things that are pretty obvious that are going to be broadly applicable in the future. I imagine this academic exercise has identified some high interest and high impact areas that perhaps we can do things. Sandwich boards. We had to wait until COVID where we implemented an emergency sign code revision to allow sandwich boards in our downtown. I believe strongly that there's some exceptions to this rule of we must wait until the consultant's done next year before we may implement some amount of changes that will positively affect our community today. And so I would be very interested in understanding better what opportunities we do have to make a difference right now, or in a month, or soon. Understand that the whole big package really does need to wait and needs to be comprehensive. So if there's some easy wins, I'd be very interested in understanding that, Mr. White.
Well, let me suggest that we're probably, I think staff has the message. We can talk a little bit and then bring maybe a more detailed. This has kind of been an off the cuff presentation on sign code update in response to a question, and I think the dialogue's been great. I think we're getting a sense, certainly, if we didn't already have it before, council wanting to expedite this process as much as possible. And I think we can come back at perhaps your next workshop with a little bit more about the process, what it takes, and what options might be available and what the potential impacts of those options might be, so council can weigh that, and then we can maybe get some direction at that meeting. If that's acceptable to council.
That's acceptable to me. How about council?
Yes.
Yes, it's acceptable. This is Mayor Pro Tem Barajas, and just before we conclude, I do have a question, actually, either for Dave or Director White. Now that we're talking about codes and updating guidelines and codes, I have had some questions regarding the process of requesting codes, business code, how they impact businesses, and what the process is really. It's been brought to my attention that certain business owners feel targeted because they're told they're not compliant. When they change things to be in compliance, it's still not within guidelines, I guess. Not exactly sure what the situation is, and I do intend into looking further into it to bring you more information. But what is the process to maybe escalate a code enforcement violation, or maybe what is the process?
Well, it's hard to address generally without specifics, of course, but assuming a business feels, let's say, targeted, or feels that a code requirement is not pertinent to whatever they're doing, to whatever business conduct that they're operating under, I would encourage them at least to simply contact me, and I can help explain that. Most likely, and I've seen this a number of times, it is often either a misunderstanding or miscommunication or there were people involved at the outset that weren't involved at the conclusion, or some kind of breakdown in the train of communications. But Councilwoman Barajas, without specific examples, I would just encourage them to contact me, and then I can get to the bottom of it and provide an appropriate resolution. And of course, I'll include you and or whatever council member is involved with the response.
Perfect. Thank you, Director Wright. I will send you details as I can get them.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
I did have, just since we're still chatting here a minute, Councilmember Roach asked me about Arts and Culture Commission. So they've met on July 22nd was their first meeting. They met August 26th. They just met last week, 22nd, and their next meeting is 10/27. They've sort of landed on the fourth Tuesday of each month at 6 p.m. and they're moving along in terms of understanding the process. We've been chatting with them a bit about some projects where they can jump in and make an impact right away. I know they have an interest in the sign code, particularly as it pertains to murals. We've had some contact this week, and they've also are very interested in some of the downtown art associated with Peanuts Park and the north side of Peanuts Park, as we had chatted earlier about that being sort of an art outdoor gallery of sorts. So they have some great ideas, and they're pretty excited about being able to work with the city. I don't know that they've necessarily put out a specific project yet. They're just kind of feeling their way through the process and kind of getting a handle on where they want to take the city, and or at least recommend to the council where we take the city as it pertains to public art and cultural events. So.
Right. Thank you for that update. And that was from Ms. Councilwoman Roach.
Yeah, just wanting to know who out of staff is assigned to, I don't want to say supervising, but it's getting late and I'm looking for the right word. Who's attending those Arts Commission meetings out of the staff?
So we do have one of the things, I mean, this is a very specialized and unique work that the committee's doing. Matter of fact, council recognized that just in the composition of the committee. And so we had hired an expert to work with them. And then for our staff liaison is Angela Pashon, Senior Management Analyst in my office. And her and I talk a lot about this commission. Matter of fact, I attended their first meeting and plan to attend from time to time myself personally, because I think it's I mean, all of our commissions I feel are important, but this is a new one and need a little bit of a lift, and they're on a new mission. And I think we have some ideas at the staff level we can share with them as to how they can engage quickly and make an impact on some projects really early.
I'm really excited to see what they put forth, and I think also the reason why I ask about that is just in thinking about last week's conversation of the Inclusivity, Diversity, and Equity Commission, getting lost in the shuffle with COVID, but also something we did not discuss last week was just that the staff liaison for IDEC was Mr. Morales, and he retired, and so then for several months, I'm not sure that anybody was reassigned to that. And so wanting to make sure that any of our new commissions or boards have that support with the staff and are as productive as they can be and get the direction that they need.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. We'll go to the next item on the agenda. That's executive session. And do we have a need for an executive session tonight?
Not this evening.
All right. Thank you. With that, I'll just ask everybody to be safe, have a great week, and we'll see you next week. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.